Welcome to Eden's Delights, a coveted video series featuring useful plants of the Bible. World-renowned archaeologist and avocational botanist, Dr. Ed Bez, in this entertaining series, teaches you how to grow biblical health food that will sustain in the harshest of climates. And now, Dr. Ed Bez and Eden's Delights.
In this series, I intend to highlight those biblical plants and trees and flowers and roots and shrubs that were used and are still being used as a rich source of nourishment and nutrition. And in this particular show, we will explore the numerous uses of flora in the Bible, other than the obvious culinary uses where the fruits and the flowers were used for both spice and for food. Let me just begin by listing a few ideas. This list, by no stretch of the imagination, is a comprehensive one, but it'll give you an idea of how strategically important biblical flowers and plants actually were to the ancient peoples. First of all, plants, think about it, were actually worn. Literally, the ancient peoples were covered literally head to toe, turban to sandal. All of the cloth and textiles would come and were manufactured from a variety of plants, such as flax and cotton. Another use of biblical plants was in making dyes by which they would color the different fabrics. Another use would have been perhaps in the making of perfumes and cosmetics and different anointing oils, like, of course, spikenard and the holy anointing oil that is mentioned in the Torah, and also a small plant called henna, from which ancient peoples would create these lovely decorative tattoos. Another use, the most fascinating field, it's one of the fields of study and research that most fascinates me personally, and that is the medicinal use of ancient plant species. For example, even in the New Testament, we hear some advice for someone who has an upset stomach. A little wine for the stomach's sake. And of course, wine is made from grapes, one of the great plants of the Bible. Another use would be a source of fuel. Think about it. In the ancient times, they didn't have diesel fuel, kerosene, gasoline. How they fueled their food preparation was fueled by bark and trees and limbs and shrubs. Another use was to generate light in darkness and heat in the cold of the night. Another use of biblical plants was to fashion tools and weapons and furniture. For example, the tools, some of the tools would be the plow shaft that was used in digging up the tough terrain in the ancient Israelite territory. And their weapons, the shafts, for example, of their spears, and the shepherd's staves that were used by the nomadic shepherds, and also the prophet's table mentioned in the book of Kings, small piece of furniture made by some of the gnarly wood, maybe even from the olive tree itself. An eighth purpose or use was the construction of actual cities and villages and shops and towns, and also for the stockades for the herds of the ancient peoples in the Middle East. Extensive use was used of plants in sacred ceremonies. Oh my goodness, think about it. From the profane idols that were whittled in wood to the elaborate temples that were constructed, sacred trees and sacred groves were planted and grown. And in the worship of Yahweh in the Old Testament, oh my goodness, the grain offerings that were offered up of barley and of wheat and the different perfumes and anointing oils. Another use of plants was that it inspired artistic designs and even some of the concepts of architecture. For example, the lotus becomes used as a beautiful capital in the construction of Solomon's temple. And the lily of the valley, what a beautiful, we sing beautiful hymns and songs about the lily of the valley. So it inspired poets and singers and artisans and sculptors and carvers. And I even suggest to you that beautiful flowers inspired lovers. Read the Song of Solomon, the Canticles, and feel and sense the pulsations of love when they talk about the beautiful fragrances of the apple blossoms. Another use is to make writing materials. In the ancient world, there wasn't paper like we understand, but it was papyrus. It was made from a reed that grew along the Nile River and other marshy areas. And the reeds themselves were used and sharpened into pens. So the writing material came from plants. And it was used symbolically. Plants were used figuratively and metaphorically. The fig becomes a sign of the growing and rising nation of Israel. And the olive becomes a symbol of peace. And finally, to fuel ancient economies. Because in the ancient world, plants and fruits were imported and exported. And the Spice Road is a very, very famous historical and archaeological landmark that stretches all the way from China, all the way into Israel. So I've just touched on a few items here, and on our next broadcast we're going to focus more specifically on one of these items, one of the trees, one of the plants, and we will go a little slower pace and we'll look at the scriptures and see how the scriptures tell us that these beautiful plants of the Bible, I call it Eden's Garden, Eden's Delights. And I look forward to seeing you in our next program. Thank you so much, and God bless, and shalom.
This series has been brought to you by the Biblical Botanical Garden Society, USA. For more information, we invite you to go to www.bbgsusa.com or contact Dr. Bez at bbgsusa@yahoo.com. This has been a BBGS presentation.